Jr. alone. Leona worked as a housekeeper, and she would bring Clifford Jr. with her to work, giving him as much attention as possible. Clifford Jr. was the apple of her eye and the center of her world.
Leona coddled Clifford Jr., giving him everything he wanted. He learned quickly that she was his to control, and his earliest years were a primer course in manipulation. Vanessa's going to take over on the psychology here and throughout the episode. Please note, Vanessa is not a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist, but she's done a lot of research for this show.
Thanks, Greg. Clifford Olson Jr. had plenty of narcissistic tendencies. According to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition, or DSM-5 for short, people with narcissistic personality disorder have several key symptoms. Narcissists lack empathy and only care about other people's feelings insofar as other people's feelings relate to themselves. Their relationships are superficial and self-interested. They have an inflated sense of self-worth and constantly seek attention to validate that self-worth.
It's possible that for Clifford Olson Jr., his ego became inflated at a young age. He was the most important thing to his parents, so he might naturally think that he was the most important thing in the world.
It's tempting to think that this can explain Clifford Jr.'s later violence, but the truth is much more frightening. Clifford Olson Jr. is an exception to the serial killer rule.
Most serial killers have traumatic or stressful childhoods. Their parents were abusive or neglectful. They often suffered from sexual abuse, witnessed violence, or suffered from some other horrific incident.
These incidents often condition these killers to dehumanize others from a young age. For most killers, their psychological problems are caused by problematic childhoods. That's not the case for Clifford Olson Jr.
Clifford Olson Jr. claimed to have suffered from childhood abuse, but he was a compulsive liar who changed his stories on multiple occasions. Most sources indicate that Clifford Olson Jr. never suffered from childhood abuse, physical, sexual, psychological, or otherwise. His parents did not suffer from psychological disorders, nor were they alcoholics or drug users. They even had 3 more children, none of whom displayed the same misbehaviors as Clifford Olson Jr.
While his mother coddled Clifford Olson Jr. in his infancy, the arrival of his other siblings began to demand a great deal of Leona's attention. His mother could no longer give Clifford everything he ever wanted, and the coddling came to an end. This early coddling could hardly explain his later murderous behavior. After all, many firstborn children are coddled by their parents, but most don't turn out to be serial killers.
We like to think we can understand what causes someone to become a serial killer. If we can understand the circumstances that produce these abhorrent individuals, we can understand how to avoid making more of them, or at least learn to spot them before they start killing.
Unfortunately, the complexity of the human psyche means psychological malfunctions rarely have a single cause. In the case of Clifford Olson Jr., we can't find any external cause for his behavior. The idea that the average parent can have a child, and that child could grow up to be a serial killer due to no fault of the parent, that is a truly terrifying idea.
In 1945, World War II finally ended. Clifford Olson Jr. was 5 years old, and his father moved their family to Richmond, British Columbia, a suburb of Vancouver. They moved into a neighborhood that was built by the Canadian government to help house its veterans. Clifford Olson Sr. got a job as a milkman, and he drove one of the last horse-drawn wagons in the area. Leona Olson started working at a local fish cannery.
The Olson home was stable and supportive. Clifford Olson Jr. began attending elementary school, but despite his stable home life, his poor behavior soon began to show.
Clifford Olson Jr. acted out in class. A former teacher of Clifford said he deliberately misbehaved to be the center of attention. Sometimes it was almost as if he wanted to be caught.
The DSM-5 lists attention-seeking behaviors like these as one of the symptoms of narcissistic personality disorder. In elementary school, Clifford Olson Jr. was already showing these signs.
Other people who knew Clifford as a child described him as a smart aleck, a loudmouth, and a bully at heart. His father, Clifford Sr., remembered that Clifford Jr. was always getting into fights at school and getting beaten up.
Clifford Jr. was small as a child, and his narcissism meant that losing these fights only served to make him angrier towards the others around him. He blamed other people for his own failings and continued to repeat the same mistakes.
When Clifford Jr. was 10 years old, he began skipping school. While he was out of class, he engaged in criminal behaviors and practiced conning people. He would go door to door selling out-of-date lottery tickets. He picked berries from people's backyards and then sold them back to the growers. He also stole milk money left out on porches.
His father was the milkman, so Clifford Jr. felt the milk money belonged to his father. If the money belonged to his father, then that money belonged to Clifford Jr. too. This inflated sense of entitlement is also an aspect of the narcissism that was present in Clifford from an early age.
Beyond petty theft and small con jobs, Clifford Jr.'s behavior started to escalate. He tormented the neighborhood dogs and cats for his own amusement. Rumors began to spread that Clifford Jr. had smothered 2 pet rabbits as well.
According to a study published in Child Psychiatry and Human Development by Douglas Wax and Victor Haddocks, childhood cruelty towards animals is strongly associated with psychopathy. When Clifford Jr. began mistreating animals, it was the first sign that his psychology was more dangerous than simple narcissism.
Clifford grew tired of losing the fights that he'd been starting. He began to study boxing at a young age. Once he became a more competent fighter, his father said Clifford began making the rounds of the boys who had beaten him up and evening the score.
Clifford took vengeance on people who had beat him up. Even though he was the one who had started the fights in the first place, he had a truly distorted sense of self-righteousness.
Clifford was first arrested at the young age of 13 for petty theft. He was let go after paying a small fine and focused more of his free time on boxing. In 1954, when Clifford was 14, he was runner-up in a bronze gloves boxing tournament. His boxing coach, Tommy Ewell, had only positive memories of Clifford, saying Clifford was a good boy.
Clifford was learning how to make good impressions on people. He began to read the expressions of those around him and react in manipulative ways. He built himself a superficially charming persona that he would use throughout his life.
In 1955, when Clifford was 15, his 5 years of skipping class and misbehaving resulted in him flunking the 8th grade. His teachers knew he was a clever kid, but he simply did not care to acquire an education. In 1956, he graduated 8th grade at 16 years old. Then he dropped out of school and got a job at the Lansdowne racetrack, while still living at his parents' home.
Clifford had already spent a large portion of his free time gambling at the track. He felt getting a job at the track might help him increase his winnings. The job also made it easier to pick people's pockets and steal from the till. He continued committing petty theft and pulling cons in his free time. Clifford Sr. and Leona Olson loved their son, but they had grown tired of his constant misbehavior. They gave him food, shelter, love, and discipline, but they felt like he was completely out of their control.
In 1957, Clifford broke into a woodworking factory after business hours. He rifled through the building, looking for valuable items he could sell on the street or pocket for personal use.
A couple on their nightly walk noticed Clifford through the window. No lights were on, and they knew most of the people who worked there, so they contacted the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
The police urged Clifford to come out quietly. Instead, Clifford fled out the back door.
The Mounties caught him easily.
Clifford was convicted of breaking and entering, and he was sent to prison for the first time at the age of 17.
This arrest marked a new chapter in Clifford Olson's life. His family gave up on hopes of rehabilitation, and his behavior only got worse after being put behind bars. Even the prisons of the Canadian justice system had a hard time keeping Clifford Olson's evil contained. Now a quick break for something lighter. Imagine if Amanda Knox had become a lawyer and defended those that she believed were wrongfully convicted.
Friday, February 15th, Fox brings you Proven Innocent, a new legal drama from the executive producer of Empire.
Madeline Scott, a fierce and fearless lawyer with a hunger for justice, spent 10 years in prison for the murder of her best friend. Now she and her law firm fight for those who can't fight for themselves.
It has become their mission to free the innocent and find the guilty, all while trying to discover the truth about what really happened in Madeline's case all those years ago. While a hero to some, her bold tactics garner her some enemies, namely the very prosecutor that put Madeline and her brother behind bars for a crime they didn't commit. Starring Rochelle Lefebvre, The Hate U Give's Russell Hornsby, Mad Men's Vincent Kartheiser, and Kelsey Grammer.
Proven Innocent premieres Friday, February 15th at 9, 8 Central, only on Fox.
Now, back to the story. In 1957, 17-year-old Clifford Olson was sent to the New Haven Borstal Institution for breaking and entering. This was the first time Clifford was imprisoned, but his first prison was a minimum security establishment intended to rehabilitate problem youths.
Having raised Clifford Olson, his parents held little hope that the correctional system could change him. What they didn't know was that the prison system would have a tough time holding him at all.
New Haven was minimum security. They didn't expect many escapees, and Clifford Olson did not want to be contained. He convinced 2 other young men to flee the institution with him.
They waited and watched for an opportunity. When the guards weren't looking, they left the building and ran a mile south to the Fraser River.
They dashed along the riverbank until they found a boat that wasn't securely tied down. They climbed aboard the boat and started the engine.
The trio sped down the river, only to run out of gas near Vancouver. Another boat saw that they were stranded and helped the boys get to shore. But the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, or RCMP for short, were already looking for them.
Clifford Olson managed to avoid being recaptured and made his way back home.
His parents were not pleased to see him. They urged